We'll be live on Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. So anyone who's watching, I'll get this in now and I'll get it in as well. Do all that teenage stuff, hit the bells, the subscribe, the like, the repost, whatever. Best way to support this live or podcast, whatever you want to call it. If you want to comment as well, especially on LinkedIn, you type your comments on LinkedIn as you usually would. Any questions you've got will come through to us and we can share and answer those questions as we go along. I'm going to try something a bit different today as well, Connor. You're the first to use it. So there's a ticker tape across the bottom with any questions that I've asked on. So anybody who's joining 5 minutes in can see what we're talking about, and it won't be an issue for them.
So Jim White in the studio asking the questions as well.
That's it, mate. Transfer deadline day. We had some interesting ones of those as well, haven't we? I usually open up with a bit about how we met. So Connor and I both worked together in the past. That's how we met. Connor joined our team in a previous business. Similar personalities, similar interests. Got on really well and kept in touch ever since. I think that's a fair assessment of how we met, Connor. I don't know if there's anything you want to add, or you might want to throw me under a bus.
No, I think that's a pretty good assessment. Yeah, we really enjoyed our time working together, and we've always kept in touch since. And I always look to link up whenever we can.
I say similar interests. I'm not into golf, and Connor is. So Dave won that battle, a different colleague. I'll get straight into questions then. So I'm going to test the tape out across the bottom here. So tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
So obviously Connor Wilson. I've been in the education sector now for 8 years actually, which has flown over, to be honest. Originally from the sort of more corporate world. I would like to say company names on here.
Yeah, if you want. Yeah.
So Sage was at Sage for almost 5 years, and that's really where I sort of built my career in that sort of corporate space. And then they were dipping their toes in the education sector, sort of coming up to 8 years ago, launching Sage for Education, which I'm sure lots of listeners will be using as well. And that was sort of my first taste of education. And from there, being in various different businesses in different capacities, but business development manager in various different companies, and love the sector.
I've been in education and edtech for a quarter of a century now, and I didn't know Sage had dipped into. It's that obvious, isn't it? It's that obvious I would have done it that I never really thought about it. So you've alluded to you've worked previously in big fintech, let's call it fintech, a big fintech company, been successful there. So I wanted to ask a few questions about that, if I can. So what's the main difference between that large corporate fintech environment and the edtech space?
To put it quite bluntly is the friendliness, I think. The edtech sector is a lot more friendly, and that's not like any disrespect on the fintech space at all. It's a great. I really enjoyed my time in that fintech space as well. But I think edtech is a lot more friendly. I think you build more lasting relationships in edtech as well. Because of the nature of the sector, there's that sort of crossover, and you keep in touch with people at events and various different things. And I think you build more long-standing relationships. In my opinion, anyway. It may be different for other people, but that would be the main difference I've seen, to be honest. The more long-standing relationships, and I think people are more receptive to contact and helping each other out as well. I think in that fintech space, it's sort of head down. Everyone's 100-mile-an-hour cracking on, and there's absolutely the element of that in the edtech sector as well, just with a little bit more bow and ribbons on it, and a bit more. There's the reason we're here is ultimately for the kids, in no matter which business you're part of, and I think that's one of the driving forces in the edtech space, and really comes across when you're interacting with people as well.
If I had a quid for every time I've said this, I'd be rich, a lot richer than most. I think the difference is, and the reason why people are like that in education is the value's different. So in the corporate world, value is revenue and cash, really. And I know it's not the be all and end all, but in education, it's about social value. So it's like, what impact ultimately can you have socially on communities and stuff? And yeah, there's a revenue goal attached to that in most cases, but you can always trace what you're doing back to impact if you're doing it right. What was the transition from that corporate role to EdTech like for you? I'm guessing it was a little bit different to others because you were in the same business to start with, but what was it like for you?
Yeah, so I think my perception of the sector, like I loved the sector when I first experienced it at Sage, but then to get that real taste of it was once I left Sage and joined Hub for Leaders, and the sort of the transition at Sage, you still had that sort of fintech sort of expectation from sort of like management and like the senior leadership team, whereas because they were also juggling that that fintech space as well as the education space, they didn't have that real deep understanding of it at that time. I know that will be different now. They've sort of evolved over the last 8 years, Sage in the sector, but at that time it didn't have its home within Sage. Whereas once I left Sage and joined for Leaders, it was a purely education business. That's what they were there for, and that was a sole focus, and that was really apparent. The focus was purely education and about how can we improve people outcomes and how can is what we're doing, one, generating revenue, which is always the underlying factor, but what we're doing here, is it actually delivering value to the sector, and is there an appetite for it? Is there much more around sort of thought leadership and more sort of relying on feedback from the sector as well, rather than in fintech, fintech brings with it huge teams, huge development teams that maybe haven't got that education experience. Whereas I've found then joining more education specific businesses, the experience is more focused and more aligned with the sector.
I had Thomas Courtley on one of these episodes a couple of weeks back, and he was focusing on the difference between EdTech and PedTech, and that transition for you, that first one, will have been more into EdTech. The way he explains it is EdTech. He used MIS as an example. MIS, it's back office, it's improving education processes. So that's EdTech. If it's something in the classroom that's impacting outcomes, it's more PedTech. Your initial transition will have been that EdTech, won't it? It's like finance related, etc.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm going to. There's a question come in from. So here we go. Tom Parkinson. He's asking, over the last few years, have you noticed education becoming more like the corporate world?
I think technology evolving in the sector is becoming more like the corporate world in terms of the pace that it's evolving, and I think tools and softwares are becoming a lot more developed and a lot more sort of high tech than what it was when I first joined the sector. But I still think the sector's done a great job of really keeping that. It's almost like a family feel to it. It's for anybody that's not in the sector, it's probably quite hard to understand. But when you go to events and when you're in trusts and in schools, it's very much got a family feel to it. So whereas I think that element isn't in the corporate world as much, whereas I think that is definitely the case in the sector. I think that where I would say it is becoming more like the corporate world is we're seeing more people coming from the corporate space into the education sector, particularly in those sort of like CFO roles, which I actually think is really good for the sector.
I'd agree.
And I think is definitely the right way to go. Bringing that sort of corporate accountancy experience in is only a good thing for the sector, particularly given the budget constraints that schools and trusts have got now. Bringing in those more specific roles into the sector, I think is only a positive thing.
I've definitely seen more and more schools understand what value for money actually means.
Yeah.
So not cheaper, but value for money. And I think a lot of that is down to having people who are business minded in those CFO roles who can really balance out cost versus impact and talk genuinely about value for money. You just made me realize something as well. when we first met, you say family feel and you go to those events. The first time we met was actually at a Schools Northeast event, I think.
Ah, yes, it was. It was.
Um,
Yeah. That was
so
the first time we met.
I
Yeah.
totally forgot about that. So this is pretty similar to what Tom had asked, really. So when you're comparing the two spaces, is there anything that definitely belongs in the corporate world that wouldn't work in the edtech space?
There's one that jumps out to me, and only because I know it doesn't work in the edtech space. And I think until you've lived it, and I'll do my best to sort of tell the story of what it used to be like. But in the fintech space, the last day of the month was chaos.
Yeah,
absolute chaos. Like, I'm not gonna liken it too much to Wolf of Wall Street. Like, I wasn't getting thrown at a dartboard. For the context of that, I'm 5'7", for anybody who hasn't met me before. But it was very much like all hands to the pump. You'd be in the office till 9 o'clock at night. Everyone would travel up from all over the country into head office, and there'd be, like, people ringing bells when deals were closing. There'd be like a live, like, projector screen of like where we were at as opposed to the number, and you just don't get that in edtech, and you would very much be able to use the fact that it was the last day of the month to get deals over the line and use that to source.
If you don't sign for this car today, it's going to go tomorrow, sort of thing.
Yeah, that type of thing. Yeah. Whereas in edtech, if you're telling a trust or a school it's the last day of the month, and it's like, well, no, it's Wednesday and we've got double PE here, so the urgency isn't there the same. But yeah, I think that's something that definitely belongs in fintech and not in edtech. With that, and that's probably the obvious one for me.
I know this will happen in the corporate world as well, but you'll tell me if it happens as often. But I think those unexpected surprises that you get sometimes in edtech. I had one once where and Dave will laugh at me for this, but I had one where I'd forecast a deal, it would definitely coming in, I ticked all the boxes, and then they turn up at governor's meeting just to sign it off, and the CEO hands the notice in, and nobody knew. It was like a total surprise. Like, yeah, well, now we've got a new CEO, we're not signing it, or we need a new CEO, we're not signing anything. I'm not sure you'd get that in the corporate world. People usually know in advance, sort of thing.
Yeah, and they normally know in advance, and there's more processes in place for if that sort of thing happens as well. I think ultimately the direction and the focus can shift quite quickly in edtech, in sort of schools and trusts. And like you say, a CEO hand the notice in can be a massive thing. Likewise, certain trustees resigning. You can be at that stage where something's got to be signed off, and then all of a sudden they've had a couple of resignations, and it's kibosh the whole deal. You definitely don't get that as much in the corporate space, but. I think the best thing about edtech is there's never a dull day. So there's always something happening.
Definitely.
One thing you do get in edtech that you don't get in fintech is you never struggle to get hold of a decision maker because of a book fair or something like that, which is in the corporate space doesn't often happen. But
it's my favorite one is when you ring a school and the kids answer and you're like, and it's dinner time or something, and they've got kids answering. That's my favorite one. So moving on then, now you're here, and you said 8 years, so you settled into this world of education and tech. Why do you stay? What's kept you here? Because 8 years is a long time. Yeah,
for me, it's the friendliness of the sector. It's the connections you've built over time. For me personally now, I can go to events and I'll generally know a few people there, and it's a good opportunity to sort of catch up with people, and you'll see people that you maybe aren't working with in your current capacity, but you've worked with them previously, and there's that sort of crossover, and they're a lot more open to conversations, and sort of it is that family feel element of it, and I feel as though in edtech now as well, I feel I've got a good understanding of the sector. I know the sector really well, and the cycles of edtech as well. Like I feel I'm well versed in that, and it's just a great sector to be a part of. And ultimately, what we're doing is making a difference. I'm not trying to sound like the hero in all of this here at all by any stretch of imagination, but there is, when you really like go back to what is the why of any product in the education space. It is ultimately improving people outcomes, whether that is enabling trusts to be more efficient with their spending, whether it is a great classroom-based product, whether it's an SEM product and giving additional support that way. You can always drill down to what is the ultimate goal and the outcome here, and it always comes back to the same thing, and that is improving people outcomes.
Yeah, 100%. And if you flip it, so I know I asked you the question, what keeps you here? But if you flip it, you wouldn't be here if you weren't in it to make an impact. I know anybody who gets into this space and doesn't realise pretty quickly that ultimately this is about making an impact in a different place don't last 8 years. Because they don't build the relationships and they don't have the conversations, they don't connect with the right people. So, that's testament to how you approach stuff, because I genuinely think you wouldn't have lasted 8 years if you didn't approach it that way. And the same for anyone that. So
yeah, definitely.
So what advice would you, and this is not just EdTech related, this is business development, so across all your roles, but what advice would you give anyone who's starting out in business development or sales? Let's call it sales. Let's call it what?
Yeah. I always say, and it's actually a former boss of mine who said this, and it really resonated with me at the time. Is sales is the best job in the world when it's going well.
Yeah,
and it feels like the worst job in the world when it's not. Which I think that is always worth bearing in mind. That expect the highs and lows. There's going to be, you're never going to be at this. This is amazing all of the time. There's going to be periods where it's a slog and where it's harder than others. But I think the best advice I could give to someone starting out in sales is to always work as if it's your first month in the business and you're trying to impress everyone. Because I think what a lot of people do and where they fall down in sales is once they start to have a little bit of success and they start to do well, they slack off on the prospect and they're not doing as much of the dog work, so to speak, that they did at the start when they were really eager to please and wanting to show everyone how good they are. And I think that then tails off, which then causes a backlog of problems as well and challenges. But I think always make time to do the stuff that you did at the start and always go back to those basics and the roots. And I think it's about just doing the fundamentals. I think the best salespeople in the world do the basics really well. And listen is probably the other bit of advice. Listen more than you speak.
Yeah, definitely. If you it's the good old prospecting thing, isn't it? How many people stop prospecting when inbound's good?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you don't prospect. You don't prospect to find leads. You prospect to, you don't prospect because there's no inbound. You prospect because you don't want to rely on the inbound.
Yeah,
you could be the best salesperson in the world this month at the detriment of the next 4 months if you're not doing those basics.
Yeah.
If you're relying just on the number.
And so prospecting makes you better with the inbound as well. So when you 100%. Are prospecting, it makes you better at dealing with the inbound. You can be much more efficient at it. You can qualify out a lot quicker as well. And because you're doing a lot more in-depth qualification in that prospect, and you're extracting those pain points, and you're learning a lot more about their organization as well. Whereas when it's an inbound lead, I think a lot of salespeople make the mistake of like jumping on it, right? They're going to buy this. Like they've taken me to there's an inbound lead, and they miss masses of opportunity because they're too quick to just try and close that initial interest. Yeah,
definitely. So I can't go through the whole live without referencing comedy. We've both got a shared love of comedy, I'd say, but you've I know you've dipped your toes into the world of stand-up. So I've got two questions that are related to comedy. The first one is, how important is laughter in the workplace?
Yeah, you're right. I did dip my toes into comedy. So I was 17, 18, just to give it a context to this. So I was 17 and 18 at the time when I was doing it. And I loved it. I did it for around a year, performed at the Edinburgh Festival as well. And yeah, I loved it. And ironically, the reason I stopped is I hated the time away from home at the time. And then went into a business development job where I then traveled for work. So, this could have been a very different conversation. I could have been on like Joe Rogan or something now if things had been different, but I'll settle for EdTech Live.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, laughter in the workplace is so important. I think there's naturally got to be boundaries and not crossing lines. But when we worked together, Chris, we had a great laugh, didn't we? And I think it's
definitely.
it's uplifting laughter. I think I don't know if you've seen the video of like that guy on the tube where he's watching a video and he's laughing, and like the rest of the tube all start joining. I think it's infectious and it can really like lift people's moods. And I think laughter in the workplace is super important.
A lot of rejection in our roles. And there've been a lot of rejection throughout our careers as well. And I think without that laughter, and the people around us, understanding how to pick us up through laughter, etc., I think it'd be a dark place sometimes. It definitely is the go-to place for me on one of those days where you get a 15 no's and nobody wants to talk to you, and it can feel pretty dark and down, can't it, sometimes? So definitely important to me.
The camaraderie as well, though, of being able to like laugh at each other, but most importantly, being able to laugh at yourself is the most important. But I know you always tell a great story about the one that Dave and Tom never let you forget. But yeah, it's about that being able to have that bit of banter with each other.
Go on, remind me, because there's probably a couple of those.
I think you touched on it about the lost deal and the CEO and the notice and that.
So Dave does it every day. I mean, it was a school that a church school. So there's plenty of schools with the same name. Every time one pops up, I get grief. Yeah, he's sniggering away to right at me now. I can hear him. So yeah. Second question then. It's comedy related, or it's not even a question. I want to know your best joke. I've put clean there.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, it's the best clean joke. Oh, it's been so long since I did it. I'll not tell a joke because it without good support act on to warm the crowd up first, it wouldn't be as funny. But when I did stand up, so all of my stuff was all like storytelling and stuff. I wasn't like a one-liner type person.
Yeah.
Mainly because my memory's too bad, I would forget them. But yeah, like I like to try and tell stories based on like real life, and the part of my set that I always used to put in, one, because I found it quite comforting. So it was around my nana dying, like when I was 17.
I don't know if it's a smile or not now.
Yeah, that's not the joke, by the way. That's not the punchline. But this genuinely happened, and you're deep into something when you first thought, when your nana's passed away, I can write a joke about this. So my nana died at home. It was just after Christmas. She died with the family around her, and then I went and seen her before the undertakers came and took her away. And we were stood there till the day I die. I'll never forget this. So my nana was on the bed. She wasn't saying much. She was dead. I had me in the middle, my mum to my left-hand side, and my Auntie Carol to the right-hand side. Nobody knew what to say. It was really like, oh, boy, a little bit eerie. Everyone was deadly quiet. And my Auntie Carol came out with something that was brilliant and purely accidental. But she said, "Hi, Mum, it hasn't been one of your better days, has it?" And I honestly thought in that moment, I just looked at her and my mouth just dropped. And I thought, that is unbelievable that you've just said that. I mean, there was that day when the paper boy didn't deliver a paper. That was a bad day. There was that day that tow Axon down the street nicked her milk off the step. And then the day she died, that was her 3 worst days in her life. And I honestly couldn't believe it. I haven't done that joke justice in any way whatsoever at all, but it was a true story and it actually happened. And it used to be a lot more funny when I used to tell it.
I've got one that might make people laugh as well. Dave warned me not to do this, but my mum and dad have been away since November. They went to New Zealand to see my brother. So I've got a bit of clothing that might make people laugh. You might like this. They brought me back an Ugg hat.
That is brilliant. Is it? Did you say it's an Ugg hat as well?
Yeah, it's Ugg. Genuine Ugg.
I've got the slippers, and they also double up as earmuffs.
I wish I could screenshot it. Oh, no, I can just go back and pause it. I'll do it.
I know that'll be doing the rounds at some point.
So I'm going to move on to 2 quickfire questions to wrap up with. One thing that you've seen, and it just don't have to be a product. It can be anything. It can be something someone said, something they've done, whatever. But one thing that you've seen during the last 8 years working in education that made you go, "Wow, this is special."
Yeah, it's fairly recently actually that I came across it. So obviously post COVID, there's loads and loads of kids with loads of sort of SEMH challenges, and around sort of like speech and language, and just general well-being. And there's a company called Mabel Therapy that I've recently came across, who do online speech and language therapy and online counselling for kids as well, because the LA don't have the capacity really to support the current challenges, and it's a severely underfunded area, and there definitely seems to be more sort of focus on it. But those guys really seem to be making waves in the sector. And they've got like math dashboards as well, like which is always a useful thing in terms of from a software point of view. But that's one of the things that I've seen recently where I thought, that is definitely something that the sector needs, and there's huge demand out there. And hopefully, I think there's an election this year, isn't there? So it's on everybody's minds. Like, all parties are talking about it in terms of increasing funding for that, and I think that can only be a good thing.
Anything that reduces time it takes for kids to get seen who are really struggling in that area, and people and adults as well, children, young people, adults, is definitely worthwhile. Definitely.
Yeah, it's all about those early interventions as well, isn't it? Because that's what really makes a big difference. If you can have that early intervention and sort of help that child at that early stage, they've got the rest of the learning and the rest of the life to really benefit from that as well.
If you conscious of time, so I'll not go on about this for too long, but I used to work in a council at one point many moons ago, and I can remember talking to somebody then, I can't remember who it was, about the earlier you intervene, you don't have to do any preventative work. So if we can get to see those kids who have got challenges really early, you're going to prevent loads and loads of stuff taking place later down the line. And that stuff that takes place later down the line is really expensive as well.
Yeah.
So for that little bit of investment up front, definitely worthwhile. It will prevent trauma and stuff for the kids further down the line, but also from a cost point of view, the country will save loads of money.
Yeah, definitely.
And then the second quick fire is one book or podcast that you'd recommend to everyone listening, and why?
Oh, can I do a book and a podcast?
Yeah, everyone else has just ignored me as well, so everyone else. I don't know if I've worded the question wrong, but yeah, you can do.
So the book I would recommend is a book called The 5 a.m. Club, and it's honestly just a brilliant read in terms of how it's told. Like, so it is what you'd probably class as a self-help book. Like a quite a motivating book, but there's so many good lessons in there around like sort of how to structure your morning and the start of your day. You don't have to get up at 5 a.m. It's not a requirement of it, but it's really good foundations to start the day that you get out of it. So that's definitely a book I'd recommend. And then in terms of podcast, I would be remiss if I didn't shout out a fellow Geordie in the podcast, but it's actually a huge podcast as well, almost 2 million subscribers. It's a podcast called Modern Wisdom. It's a guy called Chris Williamson, who's also from the Northeast, and he has some unbelievable guests on there, really wide-ranging topics, and just some really great learnings from there. And it's just a really in-depth conversation with a whole array of different people, from fitness experts to sleep experts. It's not all sort of well-being. Tim Kennedy's recently been on there, who was like an SAS soldier, in the US, and just a whole range of people, but some really, really, really cool, interesting stuff.
That's a bit like the Jake Humphries one, isn't it? High performance.
A
range of topic. The idea is the same, but a range of different people from different backgrounds and different topics. I might though do the whole 3-minute abs thing and write a book called The 4 a.m. Club. I don't know what about yet, but I might do that.
Be a different book if it depends whether you're getting up at 4 a.m. or staying up till 4 a.m. That's the difference in the book, doesn't it?
Yeah, you're close, aren't you? It's like, am I going to bed or not? Tom said you've got to tell that now. I think he's on about the story for me. I'll do that later, Tom. I'll fill you in later. Last thing then, Connor, where can people find you? Where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, LinkedIn. Hit me up on LinkedIn. I did have a Twitter at some point, but I've got locked out of that when it's moved to X. So God only knows what that's doing now, floating around in the metaverse or whatever it's called somewhere. But yeah, LinkedIn, Connor Wilson, CONNOR. I know there's about 15 different ways of spelling Connor.
Not this way. Not this way.
Oh,
Tom.
Tom, come on, Tom. It says it on the bottom, Tom. How have you got that one? It's there. But yeah, LinkedIn. Yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn. Drop me a message. Is the best way to get in touch with me.
So just before I disappear, then everyone, like I said at the start, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell. It is definitely the best way to support us. We've also got the YouTube channel, so we're live on there now as well, or we should be. But you can head over and subscribe there as well. And I'll break down different bits of education data content on there as well. So it's not just these lives. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Cheers, Chris. Been a real pleasure.